Hey friends, it has been a while. I am pregnant and just entering my second trimester, so just really coming back from just a little bit of a rough season in that first trimester, but I am so ready to jump back into the Wings video series that I started, and we are all the way up to Enneagram 7 Wings, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So really we're going to be talking about the differences between 7 with a 6 wing and 7 with an 8 wing. Now I think this is a pretty common conundrum because of that comparison between Enneagram 6 and Enneagram 8 that I think sometimes people get stuck in really comparing what I would call reactivity between 6 and 8, because that is a characteristic of both of those types. Both 6 and 8s can really be people who speak their mind. When we say reactive, what we mean is somebody who needs to say something, can't really hold themselves back from reacting. And our reactive types, in addition to 6 and 8, are 4, 6, and 8. Now, this is where some of the similarities between 6 and 8 really start to diverge, because there are some big differences. I would say really one of the most experiential and textbook differences between 6 and 8 is really that difference between head type and gut type. Now, when we're talking about Enneagram 7, we're already talking about a serious head type. So when we see 7 with a 6 wing, that tends to be what I've called before a double head type. So there's this double analytical energy. Now they express it in different ways. A 7, as we've talked about before, expresses the intellectual energy and really that core root that all head types have of fear in an external way. 7s, in order to deal with their fears, move out into the world and outside of their heads. 7s tend to be idea people, but have trouble with focus, so it tends to look a little bit like, and this idea, 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 and I want to do all of them, because they focus so much on the experience, and really that's where that title of the Enthusiast comes from, because of that enthusiasm for experience and for action and for getting out into the world and moving about. Now I want to say there's a common misconception about 7s that this energy always has to apply to the social sphere. It doesn't, and that's when we get into instincts, which really in the comments recently I've seen a lot more of you guys mentioning instincts, which is really exciting to me, because I think, at least from my point of view, instincts is one of the most important, if not the most important concept in the Enneagram. And when we look at Enneagram 7, there is a social first 7, but there are also social last 7s, and so we see that energy towards the experiential and towards that heady energy that applies itself to action in the world. We see that in regards to social things, but we see it also in regards to really just experiential things. We see it in regards to intimacy. We see it in regards to all sorts of things. But going back to the wings comparison, yes, that 7 with the 6 wing has that double heady energy that involves those qualities of 7 I mentioned, but also involves the qualities of 6. And what that usually entails is that core sin of fear for 6, which tends to manifest in a way that looks very vacillating, or very much a dichotomy of, is it this or this? Is it this or this? And that indecision that 6s often experience because of this lack of security in that they feel for their self. 6s tend to look to something larger than the self in order to feel security. So a lot of times when it comes to decision making or pulling the trigger, 6s can tend to not really know which way to go until they consult that higher authority. So the higher authority could be their family members, it could be their best friend, it could be some sort of corporate entity, it could be a sports team affiliation, as I've talked about in previous videos. But most 6s that I've even interviewed and talked to will say things to the effect of, yeah, I mean, honestly, if I asked my best friend what they thought after I made a decision and they said something different than what I did, I would feel like a lot of self-doubt, because 6s tend to look to those resources of people that they see almost in this hero complex perspective for that sense of security. So we have this kind of anxious energy of vacillation between I'm not sure what to do, mixed with that 7 energy of this idea, this idea, this idea, this idea. So we have a very bouncy, as I said before, with 7 energy mixed with vacillation energy. Now, 7 with an 8 wing, on the other hand, I would say far and away is a much more grounded 7 than the 7 with a 6 wing. And a much more stoic 7, that 8 component brings to the table a gut type or a body type. And what that means is that the gut types and body types are not in the head but in the body, in that they move before they think, whereas head types tend to visualize and conceptualize and think before they move. And specifically Enneagram 8, the Challenger, when it colors 7, tends to really bring kind of a I would say pessimistic or realistic view of things to that enthusiastic character, so that things are very leveled, and that is why 7 with an 8 wing is called the realist. Definitely 7 with an 8 wing brings to the table more of that calloused or cynical, or when we look at 8 specifically, we would say sadistic energy to the table. And 8 really is going to be focused much more on survival, what's good for them, what makes sense, cut and dry, really just the facts, man. And when I say that, I don't even mean the intellectual facts, as much as a core 7 with an 8 wing is still going to be concerned with that intellectual, heady energy. That 8 component brings to the table sort of a, you know what, there's no double thinking about it. We just move. We don't overthink. We move with our bodies into the world. And that is a huge difference between that wing 6 energy of vacillation and indecision, and that more stoic energy of we do what we do. But I have to say, those 2 types, the one thing again, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, that people tend to mistake between the 2 is the tendency towards aggression. Now, a 6 and an 8 can both be aggressive types, definitely. I have a Enneagram 6 brother, and he is definitely a very capable person from a physical standpoint or from a conflict standpoint. But a 6 is going to react much more from the perspective of fight when it comes to fight or flight. That's a huge concept when we talk about 6, in that they think, oh, I'm in danger, so rather than be cornered, I'm going to fight. Whereas an 8, on the other hand, doesn't have that stress reaction. It was one of the reasons that we apply sadism to Enneagram 8 is because there really is an unusual lack of fear in 8s. Which is also why 8 is one of the least populous Enneagram types. Coming up, the next series I'm going to do once I finish these wing series is, as I've alluded to on my Instagram account, is a series on really the least populous types and why, frankly, you probably aren't one of them. I would say those are some of the main experiential and textbook differences between Enneagram 7 wings. So 7 with a 6 wing and 7 with an 8 wing. As with all wing differences, I feel like one must take into account whether someone's wing is a weak wing or a heavy wing. I would say if you have a pretty slight wing, or what we would call balanced wings, and you don't really see as many of these distinct 6 or 8 traits in yourself as in a core 7, you're probably not going to experience or be able to point out integration or disintegration through your wing. Definitely look at it as a 7 and that integration towards 5 and disintegration to 1. But I think those individuals who have heavy Enneagram wings, myself included, I have a heavy wing, though I'm not a 7. I think that you can definitely observe integration and disintegration health spectrum in regards to wings. That's another thing. If you're really not sure about the 6 and 8 discrepancy for a wing for yourself or someone you know, really look at that health structure. A 7 with a 6 wing is going to struggle a lot more with cultural belonging that comes from that 6 disintegration to 3 and that desire to fit the image of the culture. A 7 with an 8 wing is not really going to struggle with that so much. 8 is very much I was going to say non-conformist, but they can also be guilty of anti-conformity, and that they're really not going to struggle with the pleasing of the culture. But that 8 struggle is really going to be in what I'd call Iceman Syndrome, or putting up those walls to the extent of disintegration to 5 and avarice, and saying, don't you touch my things, don't you touch my life, don't you touch my world, I will obliterate you if you do. And this very hostile energy of very selfish boundaries. And, we talk about boundaries generally as a good word in our culture, because our culture kind of struggles with boundaries. Living in this very 2, 6, 9, 3 eccentric culture, most of us struggle with boundaries, but 8s, 5s, some 4s, I would say, really some 1s, kind of have the opposite problem, which is being armed to the teeth and saying, don't touch me, don't look at me. And that is what we're going to see in that health struggle for an 8 or a heavy 8 wing. So if you are a 7 with an 8 wing, you're probably going to struggle more with those issues, in addition to that disintegration to 1 that 7 struggles with. As always, instinctual differences do play into this. If you have questions specifically about instincts, it's one of my favorite topics, and I would love to talk to you about your personal situation. I've been getting an increasing amount of emails from people talking about really just their personal Enneagram journey and asking questions about the differentiation between these distinctions. I am more than happy to walk alongside you in that and really just talk about what that looks like. I offer one-on-one consultations over Skype, and I have found that generally the feedback from those is that they help. So if you're struggling with identification, let me know. Also, let me know if you have questions about other things. The next video I'm going to be posting pretty soon here is based on a question that one of you guys asked me, and it is really starting a new series for me about a topic I'm kind of passionate about also, which is relational dynamics. We're going to be talking about Enneagram 3, which I received an email about, and kind of like those relational dynamics that pertain to not only compatibility, but what can I do to get along with Enneagram 3s in my life? What can I do to struggle with, or to engage with and minimize conflict with some of the struggles I have with Enneagram 3s? What are some of the gifts of Enneagram 3 that I can play up and encourage them in? As always, I feel like when it comes to talking about the dynamics of encouraging or interacting or challenging a certain type, we have to take into account not only their gifts, but their brokenness. And alright, we know there's sin patterns, but how did they get there? And realizing that every one of us is fighting a hard battle and has really been hurt in some ways that have contributed to our mess and our reasons for being guilty of the sin that we are. So tune back in for that. I'm really excited about it. I personally have experience with a couple of very close 3s in my familial life, so can very much relate to that email I received. I hope you found some help in this video if you are a 7 trying to identify wing, and I hope you tune in next time for that 3 video. See you then.